a battered old army jacket, a quiet, dashing demeanor. To the arrogant cops of Mercer County, he was just another vagrant to bully. They laughed, they shoved at, and they slapped the iron cuffs on his wrists. But they had no idea the governor's motorcade was speeding down the highway, specifically for him. The morning air in Mercer County, Pennsylvania, was unseasonably biting for late October. A heavy, persistent drizzle had turned the streets slick and painted the historic downtown square in dull shades of gray. In the center of the square, right in front of the county courthouse, a massive stage was being erected. Red, white, and blue bunting clung wetly to the railings, and a large banner flapped in the wind, though its words were obscured by the folding canvas. Sergeant First Class Oliver Hayes, retired, sat on a wrought-iron bench at the edge of the square. At 58 years old, Oliver possessed a face that was a map of hard miles and quiet endurance. He was a solidly built black man, though his broad shoulders were currently hunched against the damp cold. His vintage olive-drab field jacket, stripped of its official insignias, save for the faded ghost outline of a ranger tab, offered little protection against the chill. His boots were caked in thick, yellowish mud, and his dark jeans were soaked up to the knees. Oliver had not planned to arrive looking like a man who had slept in a ditch. His 2004 Ford F-150 had blown a radiator hose on Route 119, 3 miles outside of town. With cell service non-existent in the valley and time running short, Oliver had simply locked his truck, zipped up his jacket, and walked the rest of the way in the pouring rain. He was exhausted. His bad knee, a souvenir from the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan, was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache, but his posture remained perfectly straight. From across the square, a black-and-white Mercer County police cruiser rolled to a slow halt. Inside sat Officer Bradley Jenkins and his rookie partner, Officer Toby Mitchell. Jenkins was a thick-necked man in his early 30s, with a neatly trimmed fade and a reputation for treating his badge like a crown. He tapped the steering wheel, his eyes locked onto the solitary figure on the bench. "Look at this guy," Jenkins sneered, adjusting his utility belt as he shifted into park. "We've got the governor showing up in 2 hours, the National Press Corps setting up across the street, and we've got a vagrant turning the VIP section into a campsite." Mitchell, younger and visibly nervous, leaned forward. "He's just sitting there, Brad. Probably just getting out of the rain." "The rain is everywhere, Toby. He's loitering in a secured zone," Jenkins snapped, pushing open his door. "Let's go clear the trash." Oliver saw them coming. His military training had never left him. His situational awareness was as sharp as it had been during his 3 tours in Operation Enduring Freedom. He read the aggressive clip in the older officer's stride, the hand resting casually on the taser, the chest puffed out in a classic display of intimidation. Oliver took a slow, deep breath, maintaining his calm. He had faced down heavily armed insurgents in the mountains of Kunar province. 2 small-town cops with a superiority complex did not frighten him. But he knew how these situations could escalate, especially for a black man in a muddy jacket. "Morning, officers," Oliver said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded natural respect. He did not stand, but he kept his hands resting openly on his knees. "Move along, buddy," Jenkins said, stopping 2 feet away, invading Oliver's personal space. "This area is closed to the public today. State event." "I'm aware," Oliver replied politely. "I'm just resting my leg for a moment. I had to walk from the highway." Jenkins let out a short, mocking laugh, looking Oliver up and down. He took in the muddy boots, the soaked jeans, and the worn military jacket. "I don't care if you walked from the moon. You're trespassing in a secured zone. So pick up your bags and start walking, before I give you a ride to a concrete room." "Officer," Oliver said, his tone dropping an octave, becoming firmer but no less polite. "I'm supposed to be here for the ceremony. If you could just let me catch my breath, I'll head over to the coordinator's tent." Mitchell frowned, looking confused, but Jenkins immediately went red with indignation. He hated being talked back to, especially by someone he deemed beneath him. "The ceremony," Jenkins scoffed loudly, glancing back at Mitchell. "You hear that, Toby? The VIP has arrived. Let me guess, you're the guest of honor." Jenkins leaned in close, pointing a thick finger at the faded spot on Oliver's shoulder where a unit patch used to be. "Or maybe you're just another pathetic junkie playing dress-up. I hate guys like you. Buying a jacket at a thrift store, pretending you served to beg for change. Stolen valor makes me sick." Oliver's jaw tightened. The accusation stung more than the cold wind. He thought of his squad. He thought of the 5 men who hadn't made it off that mountain in 2008. He thought of the president's letter tucked safely in the waterproof pocket of his wallet. "I don't want any trouble," Oliver said, slowly reaching a hand toward his inner chest pocket to retrieve his identification. "Let me just show you my ID." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Jenkins bellowed, his hand flying to his service weapon. Before Oliver could fully comply, Jenkins lunged. He grabbed Oliver by the collar of his jacket and yanked him forcefully off the bench. The sudden movement torqued Oliver's bad knee, causing him to stumble. Seeing the stumble as resistance, Jenkins shoved the older man hard against the wet, wrought-iron railing of the square. "Stop resisting!" Jenkins shouted, slamming his forearm into the back of Oliver's neck, pressing his face against the cold metal bars. "Brad, take it easy. He wasn't doing anything," Mitchell stammered, stepping forward but too intimidated by his senior officer to intervene. "Shut up, Toby, and cuff him," Jenkins ordered, keeping his weight on Oliver. Oliver did not fight back. Decades of discipline overrode his natural instinct to defend himself. He knew that any sudden movement would be an excuse for Jenkins to escalate to lethal force. "I'm not resisting," Oliver stated clearly, his cheek pressed against the iron. "You are making a profound mistake, officer." "Save it for the judge, fake soldier," Jenkins sneered. He wrenched Oliver's arms behind his back, the steel handcuffs biting painfully into the veteran's wrists as they clicked shut. "You're going to the cage." The Mercer County Police Department was situated just 1 block east of the courthouse square, housed in a brutalist brick building that smelled perpetually of floor wax and stale coffee. Jenkins marched Oliver through the double-glass doors, keeping an unnecessarily tight grip on the chain of the handcuffs. Oliver walked with a heavy limp, his knee throbbing intensely now, but he kept his chin high and his eyes forward. "Got a live one, Sarge," Jenkins announced proudly as they approached the booking desk. Sergeant Frank Miller, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache, looked up from his computer monitor. He took in Oliver's disheveled appearance and sighed. "What's the charge, Jenkins? We're swamped today. Governor's detail is already setting up a command post in the conference room. Trespassing, loitering, and resisting arrest," Jenkins rattled off smoothly, reciting the lie with practiced ease. "Found him bothering people in the VIP staging area. Claimed he was part of the ceremony. Total nut job. Probably looking to score." Miller typed sluggishly. "Name?" Oliver stood silently. "Hey, the sergeant asked you a question," Jenkins barked, shoving Oliver's shoulder. When Oliver remained silent, Jenkins roughly patted down the veteran's pockets, fishing out a worn leather wallet. He didn't bother opening it to check the ID. He simply tossed it onto the booking desk where it slid and hit a plastic tray. John Doe for now, Sarge. Put him in holding cell 3. I want him out of sight before the suits get here. I have a name, Oliver finally spoke, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile lobby. And I have the right to a phone call. You'll get your call when I say you get it, Jenkins sneered. He grabbed Oliver's arm again and dragged him down a short hallway, unlocking a heavy steel door and pushing him into a small, windowless holding cell. The door slammed shut with a final, echoing clang. Left alone in the dim light, Oliver eased himself down onto the cold steel bench. He closed his eyes, centering himself. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. He had spent his life serving a country that still, in some dark corners, saw him as nothing more than a threat or a nuisance. He reached down, carefully massaging his swollen knee. He was supposed to be getting ready right now. The military liaison was supposed to meet him at his hotel, but Oliver had decided to drive in early to visit a local cemetery where one of his squad mates was buried. That detour, the blown radiator, the rain, it had all led to this concrete box. Back out in the precinct lobby, the atmosphere was growing frantic. Chief Robert Langdon emerged from his office, his face flushed, adjusting the collar of his dress uniform. Langdon was a politician in a police uniform, a man who cared deeply about optics and favorable press. Today was the biggest day of his career. The governor was presenting a delayed Medal of Honor to a local hero, a ceremony broadcast live on national television. "Status report," Langdon barked, pacing the floor. "Is the perimeter locked down? Are the snipers on the roofs?" "Yes, Chief," Sergeant Miller replied. "State police have the outer ring. We have the inner. Everything is secure." "Good," Langdon muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. He glanced at Jenkins and Mitchell, who were hanging around the water cooler. "What are you two doing here? You're supposed to be on crowd control." "Just processed a vagrant, Chief," Jenkins said eagerly, hoping for praise. "Guy was making a scene by the main stage, wearing fake military gear, acting erratic. I locked him up so he wouldn't embarrass the department in front of the press." Langdon nodded approvingly. "Good initiative, Jenkins. We need this town looking pristine today. No distractions." Just as Langdon finished his sentence, the front doors of the precinct hissed open. 3 men in dark, perfectly tailored suits stepped in, their eyes scanning the room with intense, professional scrutiny. Wires coiled neatly behind their ears. The Secret Service and State Executive Protection Detail had arrived. The lead agent, a tall, sharp-featured man named Special Agent Harris, marched directly up to Chief Langdon. He did not offer a handshake. "Chief Langdon," Harris said, his voice tight with suppressed panic. "We have a massive problem." "Agent Harris, welcome," Langdon said, forcing a smile. "Everything is under control. The perimeter—" "I don't care about the perimeter right now," Harris interrupted sharply. "Governor Whitmore's motorcade is 5 minutes away. The national press is live in 10 minutes, and we cannot find the guest of honor." Langdon blinked, his smile faltering. "What do you mean you can't find him? Wasn't the military liaison bringing him from the hotel?" "The liaison showed up at the hotel, and he had already checked out," Harris explained, pacing the lobby. "His phone is going straight to voicemail. State troopers found his truck abandoned on Route 119 with a blown engine. He's out there somewhere, on foot, without communication." Langdon's face drained of color. "You lost the Medal of Honor recipient?" "We didn't lose him. He drove himself," Harris snapped. "But we need to find him, right now. Put every available car on the streets. Look for an older African-American gentleman, probably wearing a military jacket or suit. Name is Sergeant First Class Oliver Hayes." The name hung in the air of the precinct. Behind the booking desk, Sergeant Miller froze. His eyes slowly drifted downward, landing on the worn leather wallet that Jenkins had tossed carelessly into the plastic tray just 20 minutes ago. The wallet was slightly open. The edge of a military EKTD card was visible. Miller's hand trembled slightly as he reached out and picked it up. He flipped the leather open. Staring back at him from the laminated card was the face of the man currently sitting in holding cell 3. Below the photo, printed in bold black letters, were the words, "Hayes Oliver." Miller swallowed hard, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. He looked up, his face ashen, his gaze shifting from the furious Secret Service agent to Chief Langdon, and finally, to Officer Bradley Jenkins. "Chief," Miller croaked, his voice cracking. I think we found him." The silence that descended upon the precinct lobby was absolute, heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic detonation. Special Agent Harris of the Secret Service stood frozen, his hand suspended in the air, his sharp eyes locked onto the worn leather wallet, trembling in Sergeant Miller's grip. "What did you just say?" Harris demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that cut through the stale air like a straight razor. Chief Langdon's face had drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly, mottled gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his own career spontaneously combust. "Miller," Langdon choked out, stepping forward on trembling legs. "Tell me you are joking. Tell me that is not who I think it is." Miller slowly turned the wallet around, holding it up like a damning piece of evidence. The laminated military identification card gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. The photo was unmistakable. Hayes Oliver, Sergeant First Class, retired. He didn't give a name," Officer Bradley Jenkins stammered, the arrogant swagger instantly vanishing from his posture, replaced by the frantic, twitchy energy of a trapped animal. "He was in a restricted zone. He looked like a vagrant. I was just following protocol, Chief, I swear. The guy was wearing a filthy field jacket and—" "Shut your mouth, you incompetent fool," Harris snarled, lunging forward and snatching the wallet from Miller's hand. The Secret Service agent examined the ID, his jaw clenching so tight the muscles twitched violently beneath his skin. He turned his burning gaze back to Jenkins. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The paperwork for this man's Medal of Honor was expedited by General Michael Kurilla at CENTCOM and signed directly by Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin just 3 days ago. The President of the United States recorded a video address for this exact ceremony. And you threw him in a cage. Jenkins took a step back, bumping into the water cooler. "He was resisting," he lied, his voice cracking in panic. "He was belligerent. Ask Mitchell." Officer Toby Mitchell stood paralyzed, his eyes wide with horror as he stared at his boots. He knew the truth, and the weight of the lie was beginning to crush his chest. "Where is he?" Chief Langdon roared, finally finding his voice, though it was shrill with panic. "Get him out here right now! Miller, give me the keys!" Langdon didn't wait. He vaulted over the booking desk, shoving Miller aside, and tore the heavy ring of cell keys from the wall hook. He sprinted down the short, linoleum-tiled hallway, followed closely by Agent Harris, 2 state troopers, and a deeply terrified Jenkins. When Langdon reached holding cell 3, his hands were shaking so violently he could barely fit the iron key into the lock. The heavy steel door finally clicked and swung outward with a grinding squeal. Inside the dim concrete box, Sergeant First Class Oliver Hayes sat perfectly still on the steel bench. He was completely unharmed, his posture erect despite the throbbing agony in his right knee. His wrists were still bound tightly behind his back in cold steel handcuffs, forcing his shoulders into an unnatural, painful angle. Yet, the expression on his weathered face was one of profound, immovable calm. He looked up at the frantic men crowding the doorway, his dark eyes betraying no fear, only a deep, weary disappointment. "Sergeant Hayes!" Langdon gasped, practically falling into the cell. He reached out, his hands hovering over Oliver as if afraid to touch him. "Sir, words cannot express. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding." "Unlock him, now!" Agent Harris commanded, stepping into the cell and physically shoving Jenkins forward by the back of his tactical vest. "You put them on, you take them off, and you do it on your knees." Jenkins was trembling violently. He dropped to one knee behind Oliver, his fingers fumbling clumsily with his handcuff key. The metal clicked, and the cuffs fell away. Oliver slowly brought his arms forward, wincing slightly as blood rushed back into his numb hands. He rubbed his wrists, where deep, red indentations marked his skin. "I apologize for the delay," Oliver said calmly, looking directly at Agent Harris, recognizing the authority of the man's suit and earpiece. "My vehicle overheated on the highway. I attempted to explain my presence to your officers, but they were unreceptive." "Unreceptive?" Harris repeated, his eyes darting to the mud on Oliver's jeans and the fresh, bleeding scrape on the veteran's cheek, where Jenkins had smashed him against the iron railing. The agent's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "Sergeant, were you assaulted by this officer?" Before Oliver could answer, the heavy doors at the front of the precinct blew open with a deafening crash. "Where is he?" A booming voice echoed down the hallway. Heavy, purposeful footsteps approached. The crowd of officers in the cell doorway parted instantly. Stepping into the dim light of the holding area was the governor of Pennsylvania. He was flanked by a massive entourage of state officials, military brass in full dress uniforms, and heavily armed executive protection agents. The governor stopped dead in his tracks, staring into the holding cell. He looked from Chief Langdon, who was sweating through his uniform shirt, to Jenkins, who was still kneeling on the floor, and finally to Oliver Hayes, who was sitting on a prison bench in a mud-caked wet jacket, rubbing his bruised wrists. "Chief Langdon," the governor said, his voice dangerously low, echoing the disbelief of the entire room. "Please tell me why the man I am supposed to be pinning the highest military decoration in this nation upon is sitting in your jail cell." "Governor, sir, please," Chief Langdon begged, stepping out of the cell and holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "It was a tragic misidentification. We had reports of an erratic individual near the secure zone. Officer Jenkins here was simply securing the perimeter. Sergeant Hayes was uncooperative, and in the confusion— "Uncooperative!" Oliver's deep, steady voice interrupted the chief's frantic spin. He slowly stood up. Despite his battered appearance, his commanding presence instantly dwarfed every other man in the room. He stepped out of the cell, looking down at Jenkins, who was still cowering on the floor. "Is that what you call it, officer? Uncooperative?" Jenkins swallowed hard, looking up at his chief for a lifeline. He refused to show ID. He was aggressive. I had to use necessary force to restrain him for public safety. "That is a lie!" The shout came from the end of the hallway. Everyone turned. Officer Toby Mitchell was standing by the booking desk, his face pale but his jaw set with sudden, unshakable resolve. He unclipped the body camera from the center of his chest and held it up in the air. "Toby, shut your mouth!" Jenkins hissed, his eyes widening in terror. "No, Brad, I'm done," Mitchell said, his voice shaking but growing louder with every word. He walked down the hall, pushing past the Secret Service agents, and stopped directly in front of the governor and Agent Harris. "Chief Langdon is lying, and Officer Jenkins is lying. Sergeant Hayes was sitting quietly on a bench. He was respectful. He tried to show us his identification. Officer Jenkins refused to look at it, called him a fake, dragged him off the bench, and slammed his head into an iron railing without provocation. The silence returned, but this time it was deadly. Chief Langdon closed his eyes, swaying slightly as if he had been physically struck. He knew in that exact second his career was over. His pension, his reputation, his political aspirations, gone. The governor turned to his chief of staff. "Get Pennsylvania State Attorney General Michelle Henry on the phone right now. I want a full, independent civil rights investigation into this department launched before I finish my speech today." He then turned a freezing glare upon Jenkins. "Take his badge and his weapon. Put him in that cell. If he tries to leave, arrest him for assault under color of authority." 2 state troopers immediately stepped forward. They hauled a sobbing, protesting Bradley Jenkins to his feet, stripped him of his gun belt, and threw him roughly into holding cell 3. The heavy steel door slammed shut, locking the disgraced cop inside the very hole he had unjustly used. The governor took a deep breath, composing himself, and turned to Oliver. His expression softened into one of profound respect and deep sorrow. "Sergeant Hayes, on behalf of this state and this nation, I am deeply, terribly sorry. This is an unforgivable disgrace." The governor gestured to a nearby aide, holding a garment bag. "We have a suite booked for you across the street. We have a fresh dress uniform, perfectly tailored. Please let us get you cleaned up. We will delay the broadcast." Oliver looked at the pristine, pressed uniform hanging in the garment bag. He then looked down at his own mud-soaked boots, his ripped jeans, and the faded olive-drab jacket he had worn when his men died in the dirt of the Korangal Valley. He remembered the dismissive sneer on Jenkins's face. Stolen valor. Trash. Vagrant. "No, Governor," Oliver said softly, yet loud enough for every official in the hallway to hear. "I will not change." "Sir?" the governor asked, confused. "Are you sure? The national press needs to see this," Oliver said, his eyes blazing with a fierce, uncompromising light. "They need to see what happens to the men and women who bleed for this country when they return home and take the uniform off. They need to see that the same hands that are expected to applaud us are often the quickest to push us into the mud when we no longer look the part. I earned this jacket, Governor. I will wear it." The governor stared at him for a long moment, deeply moved by the veteran's unwavering dignity. He nodded slowly. "As you wish, Sergeant. It would be my greatest honor to walk with you." 20 minutes later, the doors of the Mercer County Courthouse swung open. The town square was packed with thousands of spectators, military personnel, and dozens of news cameras broadcasting live across the country. The crowd erupted into cheers as the governor stepped up to the podium, but the applause suddenly faltered, turning into a murmur of confusion. Walking slowly, limping slightly up the carpeted steps behind the governor, was not a man in a pristine dress uniform. It was an older black man, in filthy, mud-caked jeans and a battered, rain-soaked army jacket. His cheek was bruised and scraped. His wrists bore the angry red marks of tightened handcuffs. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every speck of dirt, every threadbare patch on the jacket, and the resolute, unbreakable pride in Oliver Hayes's eyes. The governor took the microphone, abandoning his prepared remarks. "Today, we were gathered to honor a hero," the governor began, his voice ringing out across the square. "But today, we were also given a harsh, unforgiving reminder of our own failures. The man standing beside me saved the lives of 6 American soldiers in a valley half a world away. Yet today, in our own streets, he was treated with cruelty and indignity by the very people sworn to protect him. A shocked gasp rippled through the massive crowd. Sergeant First Class Oliver Hayes chose to stand before you exactly as he was treated this morning, the governor continued, his voice thick with emotion, to remind us that true honor does not exist only in polished brass and tailored cloth. It exists in the unbreakable spirit of the men and women who serve. And it is our duty, our sacred obligation, to be worthy of their sacrifice. The military aide stepped forward, carrying the velvet box. The governor carefully retrieved the Medal of Honor, its blue ribbon stark and vibrant against the dull gray sky. Oliver stood at attention, ignoring the agonizing pain in his knee, as the governor draped the highest military decoration of the United States around his neck. The heavy golden star rested directly over the faded fabric of his old field jacket. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the square. And then, starting from the front row of assembled military veterans and sweeping backward through the thousands of civilians, the crowd began to salute. Those not in uniform placed their hands over their hearts. The applause that followed was deafening, a thunderous roar of respect, apology, and overwhelming gratitude that echoed through the valley. Back in the dim, quiet precinct, sitting on the cold steel bench of Holding Cell 3, Bradley Jenkins listened to the thunderous applause echoing through the high, barred window. He buried his face in his hands, weeping in the dark, finally understanding the true weight of the man he had tried to break. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you the most powerful, dramatic, and unforgettable stories every single week. Your support helps us continue to shine a light on the incredible strength of the human spirit. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought of Sergeant Hayes' incredible bravery. See you in the next video.